What's up, y'all? Look, look, I just want to read it. I wanted to take a moment and read this for you. Let me see if I can brighten it up some more. All right. I just want you to see it because I know some people is not going to read their Bible. I'm going to read it for you. Okay. Let me show you who Paul defines Jesus as. Okay. Acts 17. And let's start from verse 18. Then certain Epicurean and Stoic philosophers encountered him, talking about encountered Paul. And some said, what does this babbler want to say? So it was calling Paul a babbler, meaning he's just running his mouth. Others said he seems to be a proclaimer of foreign gods because, here's why, because he preached to them Jesus and the resurrection. Who was he preaching that made them think that he was a proclaimer of foreign gods? Jesus, right? And his resurrection. Let's continue. Keep this in mind. This is important. That's who Paul was preaching and proclaiming. Jesus and his resurrection. Nobody else. Let's continue. Verse 19. And they took him and brought him to the Areopagus, saying, may we know what this new doctrine is of which you speak. Right? May we know what this new doctrine is that you speak. They thought he was speaking something new by proclaiming Jesus. So they brought him to the Areopagus, which is like a rock. Say that. Areopagus. For, look at verse 20. For you, I'm trying to hold the phone and read. For you are bringing some strange things to our ears. So Paul talking about Jesus being risen is strange stuff to him. Them preaching Jesus, preaching Jesus to them, and him risen is strange to them. For you are bringing some strange things to our ears. Therefore, we want to know what these things mean. All right, continuing. For all the Athenians, or Athenians is how you would pronounce it better. For all the Athenians and the foreigners who were there spent their time in nothing else but either to tell or hear some new thing. All right, so they think this is something new that Paul is preaching and proclaiming. Now, they accused him in verse 18 of proclaiming a foreign god by proclaiming Jesus and his resurrection, right? Watch Paul correct them and tell who Jesus is. This is very important. And this is where you're going to see where Paul believes Jesus is God the Father. Watch this. Look at verse 22. Then Paul stood up in the midst of the Areopagus and said, Men of Athens, or Athens is a better way to say it. Men of Athens, I perceive that in all things you are very religious. Right? So you got the right mindset. You're very religious in all things. You're trying to do the right thing. But watch this. Look at verse 23. For as I was passing through and considering the objects of your worship, I even found an altar with this inscription. Here's the inscription that was on that altar. To the unknown God. Okay? These men were, and in Athens, these men of Athens were very religious. And they mean well. But as Paul was passing through, he saw an altar with a inscription on it that said to the unknown God. Meaning that they don't know who God is, but they mean well as being religious people. To the unknown God. Now watch what he says. Therefore, the one whom you worship, listen, the one whom you worship, the one, not second, not third, not fourth, the one who you worship without knowing, him I proclaim to you. Now, get this. They accused him of proclaiming a false God, a foreign God, by proclaiming Jesus and his resurrection in verse 18. But now when you get to verse 23 and you read to the end of it, then you see that the God that they were trying to worship, the men of Athens were trying to worship at the, say it again, at the Areopagus. At the Areopagus, the men of Athens trying to worship the right God at the Areopagus. They had an inscription on an altar that said to the unknown God. And Paul says, therefore, to the one whom you worship without knowing. So they were worshiping a God without knowing him. And this is who he says, that's who I'm proclaiming. So he's saying Jesus is that one. He's calling Jesus the God that they're worshiping that they don't know. Now let's see who that God is even more. Look at verse 24. Does everyone see that? That's who he's defining Jesus to be. So Paul is saying that's who I'm proclaiming. Not a foreign God. I'm proclaiming the one that you mean to worship. The one that you're worshiping and don't know. Him I proclaim to you. Do you see? Now, watch who he says that him is. Look in verse 24, and this is who Jesus is. God who made the world and everything in it. This Jesus that I'm proclaiming to you is God who made the world and everything in it. That's the God you're worshiping that you know not. This is who I'm proclaiming to you. His name is Jesus. God who made the world and everything in it. Since he is Lord of heaven and earth, does not dwell in temples made with hands, nor is he worshipped with men's hands. See, this is the God that they was meaning to worship. But they were doing it wrong because they didn't know who he was, and they was using things that was made with men's hands in order to worship that God. Paul is saying Jesus is the one that this is. That's who it is. Nor is he worshipped with men's hands. Notice it says he. There's no three. And it says him I proclaim to you. Right? Not them. Him I proclaim to you. And the only one he was proclaiming was Jesus. So God is one person here, Jesus Christ. Him I proclaim to you. He's that God that you mean to worship, that you know not. Him I proclaim to you. And who was the him that Paul was proclaiming? It says to him in verse 18, Jesus. So it's just Jesus alone. And that is who the God, in verse 24, that is who the God is that made the world and everything in it, since he is Lord of heaven and earth, does not dwell in temples made with hands. Verse 25. I know I have it posted to 24, but let's read 25. Nor is he worshipped with men's hands. Look at this. Nor is he worshipped with men's hands as though he needed anything. He. And the he is Jesus that Paul is talking about. As though he needed anything, since he gives life to all, breath and all things. Do you see this? That's who Paul believes Jesus is. Now, this is the Paul that had an encounter with Jesus on the road of Damascus. And when he asked him, "Who art thou, Lord?" the Lord responded and said, "I am Jesus." So this is solid evidence that Paul's belief in Jesus is that Jesus is God. The one that made heaven and all that is in it. The one that made the world and everything that is in it. Made heaven and earth, everything that's in it. He's the Lord over heaven and earth, and does not dwell in temples made with hands. Nor is he worshipped with men's hands, as though he needed anything, since he gives to all life, breath, and all things. Do you see? Look at verse 26. And he has made from one blood every nation of men. This is the one that created man. And he has made, not three have made, no. And he has made from one blood every nation of men to dwell on all the face of the earth. There's only one who did it, and the one he's talking about that did it is Jesus. Do you see it? They were not trying to worship a second person of God, the men of Athens or Athens. They were not trying to worship a second person of God that was also a co-creator or something like that. They didn't know of another one. So it wasn't a second one that they were trying to give glory to. They were not taught a second one. They thought Jesus was a false one. They were trying to accuse Paul of teaching a foreign God. Do you see? But no, Paul is correcting them and saying, no, Jesus is that God. This one that created the world and all that is in it. The one that you mean to worship that you know not. Look at verse 26. Let me just read that through. And he has made from one blood every nation of men to dwell on all the face of the earth. He has done that, not three, not a co-creator, none of that. This is just one. And the one is Jesus. And has determined their pre-appointed times and the boundaries of their dwellings. Do you see? So I wanted you to see that. Again, you can read this yourself. That Paul believes that Jesus is God, and that would be the one God, the Father. He doesn't identify him as a second. He's talking about one. And it is the one that these men of Athens were trying to worship, who they knew not. Again, he said, him I proclaim to you. Not them I proclaim to you. He's talking about one. Him I proclaim to you. And the one he was proclaiming was Jesus. And the one that he said Jesus is the one that created the world and everything in it. There you have it, y'all. Paul sees Jesus as God, the Father. Peace.